Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I am co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin at 4700 Grover Avenue. Our forums are free and open to the public, and we encourage you to attend. They're usually every Sunday at noon. For more information about our forums, you can go to our website at www.austinuu.org. And now our forum co-chair, Leslie Kearns, will introduce today's speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Good morning. This morning I'm very pleased to introduce Niyanta Spellman with the Rainforest Partnership based here in Austin. And since 2008, this Austin-based organization has helped save tens of thousands of hectares of Amazon forest. Niyanta is an international citizen herself. She grew up in Tanzania, went to boarding school in India, worked for a lobbying firm in London before landing in Texas. And before founding Rainforest Partnership, she spent several years running a management consultancy and worked for the Legislative Budget Board, among others. She has a BA in biology from UT Dallas and an MPA from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at Austin. And she has two sons with UT professor and Austin City Council member Bill Spellman. Thanks, Niyanta. Come on up.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and all of you for inviting me here again. What I'd like to say is actually 5 years ago, December 2008, is when you actually invited me for the first time here to speak before you, and that was the first presentation, public presentation for Rainforest Partnership. So it's very nice this week of our sixth anniversary. On the 17th, will be 6 years old for me to be back to speak to you again and tell you what we've done in these 6 years and 5 years since I was last year. You know, having been in Austin for over 20 years and starting an organization that deals with tropical rainforests, many people say, why Austin? Certainly in Austin. Anywhere else, people get it, that we would be based here. And there are people who say, we don't have rainforests in Austin. That's true, we don't. So why a rainforest organization in Austin, Texas? And what is it that we do? I want to talk today about tropical rainforests, who Rainforest Partnership is, what we do, what are we trying to do, and why we're trying to do it, and why it matters, not just to the people who live in the forest, but people right here in Texas, right here in Austin, and all of us all over the world. So thank you for that opportunity. So what do we do? First of all, tropical rainforests. Right off the bat, let me tell you, Rainforest Partnership is about working with rainforest communities that live in and around rainforests, helping them make an income that allows them to protect the forest. What are tropical rainforests? Many of you probably have grown up and known what rainforests are. You know, many of us see a lot of TV coverage on Discovery Channel and such, and so we have this very lovely idea about what forests are. But what are they? Tropical rainforests, the Amazon. I think most of us know where the Amazon is. Most people think it's just Brazil, but the Amazon's much wider than that. It actually encompasses quite a few South American countries. It is Brazil, which is the largest part, but it also has, starting to the left, Bolivia, it has Peru, it has Ecuador, it has Colombia, it has Venezuela, Suriname, Guyana, French Guiana. All that encompasses what is a tropical rainforest in the Amazon. And actually, it is a band that goes around the tropics, around the planet. And so if you see on this map, it's a little bit difficult to the left, but you can sort of see the middle of the, on that world map, the middle of the planet, whether it's in South America or Asia or very, very little bit in Australia and a little bit in Africa as well, actually quite a bit. Tropical rainforests are different from the temperate rainforests that we have in the Northwest, going into Canada, into British Columbia. And why do they matter? What are these forests? We have hummingbirds. This is a hummingbird from a rainforest community, rainforest actually in Ecuador. Rainforests, I think many of you know, do many, many different things. They are home to over 30 million people. That's the easiest kind of thing. The UN would say that they, out of the 7 billion people on this planet, over 1 billion people actually depend on their livelihood on these tropical rainforests. What was once 14% of the land mass on this planet, what you saw on a couple of slides back, the band that you see sort of on the world map, what was 14% of the planet is now just under 6%. Those forests, what do? They're home to 30 million people. They serve as carbon sinks. They absorb carbon from the atmosphere, but they also hold the carbon in the very trees that they have. They regulate our water cycle. They're, you know, often you hear of these words as that they're the lungs of the planet. They regulate our climate. And I'll talk a little bit about how they do that and how it affects us in Texas. A lot of our water, fresh water, about 1/5 of all fresh water is actually in the Amazon, that whole area that's very close to us in South America. Biodiversity, 50%, more than 50% of terrestrial biodiversity is found in these tropical rainforests. So you think about 6% of the land mass is what holds 50% of our biodiversity. And that biodiversity is actually really, really important in a way that most people don't realize. So I think most of you know, you've heard the terms, lungs of the planet. You've heard that, there's a lot of rainfall in the forest, and you understand that. You understand the climate aspect. You understand that it's got biodiversity. You've seen all these gorgeous pictures, right? You've seen the butterflies and the moths and the birds that come out of the forest and the fruits and then the people. But a lot of people don't realize that actually we, in the Western world, also depend on our medicines on the forest. More than 25% of all our medicines originate from tropical rainforests, and more than 70% of our cancer drugs. We're highly dependent on these forests that we sort of take for granted and we know as these beautiful, lovely places. And then I have to talk about how magical they are. If your kids and grandkids and you yourselves, you remember in school, talking about how beautiful and magical they are. There's something, if you've been to the forest, and I don't know how many of you have been to a tropical rainforest, when you stand in one, there's just something very, very different in just how they feel and how they look. And they're so incredibly biodiverse that if we were standing on top of the canopy, at the sort of one of the tallest trees and looking out, it would be hard to find two trees that looked alike. And when we look out, we can see some trees, even in a natural forest, even in our temperate rainforests. There are 5 or 6 species of trees. They're beautiful. They're giants. They have a lot of mass. But they don't have the kind of biodiversity. So when you think about a forest, in the most biodiverse tropical rainforest, you could have more than 500 species of trees in just a hectare, which is 2.5 acres of land. You can imagine what a forest like that would hold. If you have that many trees, all the way down to the microbes and the primates to everything in between. So, they're so beautiful. We're so dependent on them in so many ways. We take them for granted. So why are we losing them? What is going on? I mean, you've heard about it. There are a lot of people, when I started Rainforest Partnership, said, didn't we already solve that in the 80s? That was the idea, right? In the 80s, everybody was about rainforests, and we're going to save the rainforest, and it's already saved. And the number of times I hear that, I heard that last week. I think, actually, it's just that we're not paying as much attention to that. So why are we losing them? It's a lot of reasons, right? It's that the people who live in the forest have limited income options and don't have the ability to protect them. That the majority of the forest that we lose in a country like Brazil, it's actually where it's converted for cattle, for pasture land, over 65%. It's not for logging, it's not for furniture. We often think that, it's taken out for wood that comes here. That's about 3%. It's for growing, it's for pasture land, and it's thousands of acres. It's not just a little bit here and there. It's for soybean and corn, which often gets converted to animal feed to feed the cows, right? Not the most sustainable way of doing something. It doesn't often make sense, especially when you put 1 cow per hectare. A hectare is 2.5 acres. And so you think about a forest that has over 500 trees at the most biodiverse, and you're taking that out and everything it holds, and putting 1 cow. And how many people would it feed and for how long? And then, of course, also the corn and soybean. And so what does that look like? There's the beautiful, pristine forest, and there's a lot of it. And the Amazon looks like that. And a fifth of this has been taken out in the Amazon in just the last 30 years. When we talk about the 80s, we saved the rainforest. We didn't, not quite. So what is it? I already told you about how 14% of the land mass was tropical rainforest. It's down to less than 6 now. And as I was saying, most people think it's just the wood. It's not. A lot of it is not salvaged at all. It's actually just burnt and cut down. And that's exactly what it looks like. And there it is. And that's where the emissions come from. So the thing that many people don't realize is, in a day and age when we talk about climate change and when we talk about carbon emissions, the biggest amount in terms of a sector is, if you might think of it that way, if you can call burning of a forest as a sector, almost a fifth, 17% of all carbon emissions globally, annually, come just from the cutting and burning of forests. And that's more, to put that into perspective, that's more than all the emissions from the transportation sector. So think about, I always tell people to think about the most polluted cities. You think about a Delhi or a Beijing or a Mexico City, and all the cars there. You think about planes, it's 3%. You think about trains and ships. You put all that together, and it's less than from just burning and cutting of forests. And so how much are we losing? So, it's about 32,000 acres a year, thousand. It's about an easier one to grasp. A football field, about a second. So I've been talking, in the time I've been talking since we started, we lost about a downtown worth. And most of that's not going to come back. And partly that's because what rainforest land is like. So rainforest land is not, people think that anything that could hold something that rich, that green, that beautiful, would be very full of nutrients and it's not. The soil is very nutrient poor because rainforests are very closed ecosystems. They're amazing ecosystems because everything is integrated and works together in ways that we don't even understand. And I don't think we'll begin to understand if all of us on this planet started studying it. And so, we're losing them. Why does it matter to us in Texas? I often get that. But why should I care? There's so much going on at home. We have all our problems. And I often tell people that I want people to focus on the things each person is doing because all those things are important. But that's not to say that this doesn't matter, but to bring it home. I just use a quote from The Economist. Not everybody likes that. But there's some research at A&M as well, and I think people understand this. That is that what happens to the Amazon, deforestation there affects our rainfall patterns. Gulf of Mexico, Mexico, and Texas. And if you understand the El Nino effects in terms of what ocean currents can do, then you understand how what happens at the atmospheric level would also potentially affect what happens to us here. And so it is an economic issue for us. And so, hard to see, but it still makes a difference, directly and indirectly. And so, protecting these helps us here, helps the communities who do it, and the people and the folks who live in the forest, and of course, everywhere. So what do we do? What is it that Rainforest Partnership does? So we work with rainforest communities. I think I already told you right at the beginning. We work with rainforest communities. We help them make the income that allows them to protect the forest. And how do we do it? We only work with communities that want an alternative to other more destructive choices that are before them. To the extent that they live at the edge of our Western civilization, to the extent that they need some income ability, what is it that we can help them do? What are the opportunities in the forest they live in? What's their culture? What are they already doing? And how can we help them do something differently that would allow them to make the income that gives them the stake in protecting what's already in their interest and in their backyard? So we only work with communities that want that alternative and that actually have control over their land somehow. And so, actually, by the way, that's Manuela making a basket, and I think that may be a basket that she's made. And so that's kind of our model, that we just make it more valuable for them. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do and how we do it. I won't go into it. This is too much, I think, far back. You may not even be able to see. We have a very objective methodology for how we work. Forests are magical. Indigenous communities are beautiful and wonderful to work with. But you can't just go and do it just because it moves your heart. You have to have a process and an ability to sort why it makes sense, and for the communities and for us. So we actually only work, as I said, we only work with communities that want an alternative, and that starts with us actually talking to the communities. The communities actually take vote in General Assembly. So it's if you were a community and this was your land, then you would gather here, often on a Sunday, I know, even communities do Sundays, and then take a vote. But of course, it takes a bit longer because it's an indigenous community. And everybody, the communities we work with, everybody takes a vote. And then we start the process. Now, even when an indigenous community says they want to work with us and partner with us, it's not so simple. Because they know what they want, an alternative income. But what does that mean? When you live in the jungle, you're sort of off the grid. You don't have what we take for granted. You don't have electricity. You don't have potable water. You're growing your own food. Yes, you're buying a few things. You need an income to send your kids to school, even though the school is in the community. And the way it works is every contacted indigenous community, the governments provide a primary education. Okay. So there are teachers who live in the communities, in the rainforest communities. And these days, most of these communities are not nomadic anymore. They have centers where the schools and the health centers are. And so most of them only have primary schools. And that's where they gather, and that's where the community centers are. So it starts that way, and then we leverage everything we can. And so let me tell you a little bit about our projects. When I first came and talked to you, we were just beginning that project. And so it's nice to be able to come and tell you a little bit about that. We had just, I had met with the community in April of 2008, and they knew that their forest was under threat. The way they made an income was harvesting this fiber that was used to make brooms. And they weren't doing it very sustainably, and they wanted a way to actually do it in a sustainable manner. So what we did was we helped them create a management plan. It was the first of its kind in Peru. It took a few months to create it, another few months to get it approved by the Peruvian government at their national agency. Then we went on the next year to, you can actually see what the fiber looks like a little bit when it's just raw. It's palm trees that are 30 feet tall, and then the fiber is between sort of the branches and the bark. And we came up with a system where they would harvest about a fifth of, only a fifth of what the bulk was, so that it wouldn't be affected. They would only go, actually a third of the bulk, and they would only go to 1/5 of the area once every 5 years. So they would rotate the areas where they would go and harvest. And so there is this sustainable methodology behind how it would be harvested. So we help the community do that. We help them create a business entity. We help them with the legal side, the business side. And then the community wanted ways of actually doing a little bit better, and said, instead of just selling the fiber and it's somebody else is making brooms, we can do this. So we helped them create this little workshop where they started making the brooms. And actually, I like this picture because there were 6 volunteers who went in from UT and, helped paint this little place, to help create the logo, and worked with the community members in doing that. And so that's been going on. They're probably finally at a place where they had some difficulties last year. If you think about most businesses in this country, can you imagine with an indigenous community when you're working at a community level? There's one leader wants to do it a certain way. They had to figure out how to handle money. I mean, these are new concepts. You haven't even worked. You don't work for a living, and suddenly we're talking about creating a business entity. And so our projects take a while. It's a slower, easy, difficult thing to do. They know it and we know it. But it's the empowering that happens and the community taking action, knowing why it matters. And in this community, I'll tell you, somebody tried and offered to pay people individually to reforest a little bit of land. And I was there in June, and they said, we want to work as a community. We don't like it when outsiders are trying to make us work as individuals. It's not who we are. It's a very different model than who we are in the rest of the world, right? In that community, the women said, wait a minute, we want to do something. We want to have an income. And so they started, we started working with them, and they started making these artisan products, and they've sold them in nearby trade fairs and a couple of shops in the nearby town of Tarapoto in Lima. Oh gosh, I just realized I never told you where we work. We work in Ecuador and Peru. Partly because the slides are back there and I don't want to turn around. And so then looking here, I'm instead looking at you all. So this is in Peru. It's sort of near northeast. And so the women make this, and we're working with them on creating these artisan products. And so they're using their ways of doing things that they've been doing for many, many years, you know. And again, here's some of the products they're making and the brooms themselves. And so that's not the only project where we have women working. Our next project in Ecuador, I just wanted to quickly tell you, and I'm watching the time, this is something that's been really, really amazing. So what happened, we started working in Ecuador with the women of Sani Isla. Sani Isla overlaps Yasuni National Park in Ecuador, and some of you may have read about that. National Geographic had a story, NBC ran a story. There's been a lot of news about this. In 2009, our partner nonprofit in Ecuador wanted us to work with them. We started working with the women. First time these indigenous women are making an income. What's amazing about this is we started working with them. 2009, these women would hardly look me in the eye. 2010, I'm there for the first workshop. And all morning, the women would not talk. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we funded this project. Yes, the men and the women voted and said they wanted this as an income source. They wanted the ability for the women to work. And the women are not talking all morning. And I'm thinking, what are we going to do? What have I done? Well, it's the afternoon, and the women started talking, and you could not get them to stop. And, you know, we were asking them, what makes you rich? What makes you poor? What's your vision for 5 years? And it was the older women, the women in the 50s and 60s, who said, you know, we wish we had fewer children. We wish we had education. And these women, and so here's another picture. This is Margarita. So it's on the one in the blue in the corner is Guadalupe, and Digna on the left. They are such amazing natural leaders. They've been making these artisan products. Here's something I'm wearing, earrings, you know, with seeds and fiber from the forest. What's incredible is they're making these things, they're selling to people who come visit their community-owned eco-lodge. And by last year, we had connected them with shops and hotels in Quito, which is the capital of Ecuador. And they've begun to sell them, they've begun to understand. They started self-organizing into 4 groups, and each group had a leader, and you know, each one had 4 or 5 women. And how they would look after the nursery we helped them create, and how do they gather to make the artisan products, how do they improve them, learning and relearning the skills that they, you know, their mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers knew, and a lot of the young people had lost. And then learning a lot of new skills, how to, you know, add and subtract. A lot of these women didn't really go to school. I mean, they're living in the jungle. They would still not look people in the eyes. If most of you went to the community and you can visit them, they would not look you in the eye. But they look me in the eye. And they didn't in 2009. And they would call me a friend. And I would sleep and sit with them on the floor and eat with them. And they're beginning to learn. And they're beginning to stand up. So that when a powerful oil company came to them in January and said, we're going to start drilling, and we have the right to do this on your community-owned title land, they said no. And they got worldwide attention. In fact, I was going to show you a couple of stories. This is the artisan house that we built. This is where the women gather. And by the way, it's funny. We had to move up the schedule for doing this. Because when we started the project, they said, we cannot work. And I said, well, you need to get together and start making things, because I was a little worried, are these women ever going to make things, and what if it doesn't work? Well, they said, we need a place to gather, because they live on two sides of the river, and they didn't have a place, and they did not want the community center to be the place, because that was the men's place. They needed a place of their own. So when I went the next time, one side of it is the kitchen, and I'm thinking, we didn't fund this for you to put your kitchen there. Well, but that's how these women work. So one side is the kitchen of this hut. And so when they gather, of course, eating is part of what they do. And then the kids, there's all these clots where, the kids are hanging and the kids come with them. Occasionally their husbands and, other houses look after the kids as well. They made this their own. They've planted around it. They look after it beautifully. And when there was damage to the house, they actually got a minga together. Minga is like a gathering, like a house raising kind of thing, barn raising kind of thing, and they fixed it up earlier this year. And so it's these women, having found their voices, when outside forces came, as they said, they tried to confuse us. And they said, help us understand better, what the threats are. And they've seen what's happened further down river to folks who've actually had oil extraction in the past that was not done very well. There's a lot of controversy going on. I think some of you have seen that there was a very innovative way of actually protecting Yasuni by the president of Ecuador and getting the world community to pay for it, and it went the other way. It's very, very difficult. Now there are roads coming in, and if you look at something like this, this is what often a forest looks like. What's very difficult for me is our community is the middle of the jungle, Amazon community. And I just learned on Friday that Guadalupe, who's one of my favorite person in the community, sort of an elder, very well respected, she's now got cancer. It's very, very difficult. Our first project coordinator, 27, had cancer. And you think, how? In the middle of the jungle. What is in their water? And it's not that oil extraction by itself is bad. It's how it's being done and how it does get done. It comes at the expense of the forest and the communities there. And this is what it often looks like. But the women are amazing, I have to tell you. So our other project, ecotourism, any of you like to travel, birding, we have a cloud forest community where it's beautiful, pristine forest. I know that bridge is actually now fixed. It was just fixed last month. It's amazing community. And we're working with the community to create very basic ecotourism. So we call them eco-hostels, so to lower your expectations. But what's out there is just beautiful, incredibly biodiverse primary forest. And the area has a lot of biodiversity, accessible waterfalls, endemic birds just to the area, actually a couple of new species that have not been named yet. And so that's a Colibri cloud forest. So where we're going now, couple of things we're trying to do. I'm not even going to talk about that. Let me tell you about a couple of things we do in Austin. So clearly the forests matter. And we thought, how do we make it more real for folks here? So one of the first things we started in 2010 was actually we created a film challenge called Films for the Forest. International Short Film Challenge, based right here in Austin. We get films from around the world. And the winning films for 2 years in a row, and again this next year, will be screened as part of South by Southwest Film Festival community screenings. And any of you who know folks who would like to submit a film. We have a youth category, and so several folks from Austin are going to be submitting films. We had a charter school from Dallas last year that submitted and actually won, and they came with their teacher and their parents, and they were so excited to see themselves, a bunch of 10-year-olds had made a wonderful film, and it's on our website, filmsfortheforest.org. And so how do we use the power of film to connect folks with why these forests matter and allow the sort of budding creativity in kids and adults and anybody, because nowadays with an iPhone or an Android phone you can make it. You don't have to have fancy equipment, right? And so that's one of the things we're doing. From the beginning, because rainforests are what they are, and that's something everybody has to do in school, everybody has to learn about tropical rainforests. We're trying to formalize a youth education program. We've been doing it on an ad hoc basis. A board member or volunteer will go and talk to the school when we get invited. We even get invited by, for birthday parties and such. But there's only so much we can do. So we're trying to, we've actually written a couple of proposals and see if we can get funding to do that. And so we're trying to do that. And so and let me just sort of tell you a little bit very quickly about how we've been working. So the idea for us has been to really work by leveraging everything we can. Being based in Austin, what we do is leverage what Austin does very well, which is give a lot in terms of time and resources. And so to date, we've had, I think, over 285 volunteers and interns in just about 5 years. Over 20 of them, I think 21 have gone on the ground to Ecuador and Peru, to our project sites. But from graphic designers to lawyers to accountants to folks helping us with admin work, we've actually had a way of working from as young as 13 years old to retired folks. And we've found a way of integrating that. Not always easy, but we've figured out how to do that. And so on a weekly basis, we can have, over 6 full-time equivalents of volunteer help on an ongoing basis, which I think I still have to know somebody who does it when it's specialized skills that we leverage. And the in-kind, the support is, probably at this point, probably about $1.5 million since we started. And so very quickly, I think we've, in Chapauta, our Peruvian project, we helped protect those 9,000 acres. We've helped protect the community in San Isla, protect their land. We weren't the only ones, but we played a very integral, important role in helping them to be able to say, yes, they have an alternative in making this, that they didn't have to take a far more destructive choice, even though financially it could have been lucrative for them, but that's not what the community wanted. They wanted to protect their way of life. And that's what it is for us. It's like we're going to support the community. And so the last thing I want to talk to you before Q&A is we're launching a Rainforest Partners program. And the idea here is, how do we help increase awareness for why these forests matter globally? And so inviting people to get involved in 3 ways. Basically, by joining us, becoming a Rainforest Partner, help us fund our work that we do on the ground itself, because that's important, even though we leverage a lot of in-kind. And we've leveraged as much as 2 times to 4 times for every donated dollar, which is, I think, pretty remarkable. We still need that funding. But then help us spread the word about our work and why it matters. There are a lot of individuals, as I'm finding in the last few months, who really do care. And so how do we by becoming a Rainforest Partner, how do we invite folks to share their stories for why forests matter to them? Why is it magical to them? Or, what is it they saw or felt when they learned about it at school, or when they went, when they visited a place? And then the last thing is, inviting folks to change habits and what is it that we consume and how we consume it that has an effect on the choices that get made that actually leads to deforestation. So how can we reduce deforestation by things that we do here? Because that's going to make the biggest difference. And so that's kind of the idea for who we are and how we're doing. So I would like to invite all of you to become Rainforest partners as well. And I'll take, yes.
And raise your hands high with questions, please. We have a question here. Would you stand and say your name, please?
My name is Catherine Gouvier, and I was looking at the last thing on how we can partner with you would be reducing things that we use or our habits to reduce deforestation. And I'm thinking not too long ago, maybe a couple of months ago, I got over my internet, all this email stuff, something about a big company going into Indonesia, I believe it was, and cutting down the palm trees for palm oil. And I think that's one of the things that I am doing to try to reduce my use of palm oil. I mean, they use it in everything.
They do, and most people don't know this. And so that's partly what we're going to do. So this program that we're trying to launch will actually provide information. So when I talk about palm oil, most people don't even know that palm oil is so tightly related to deforestation.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's pervasive in everything, from makeup to soaps and to foods, and yeah.
But I think that because this came over the internet, a whole lot of people, I believe that this was stopped in Thailand. They didn't continue trying to cut down the palm trees. But my question is, how do corporations that come into countries tell the people that are working with the government or whatever that this will benefit their population? I mean, is that something that the population, the people who live around there know that they're going to benefit from this in any way, or is this simply something between government and corporations that people have no say in, and it happens like the oil companies that you showed?
Well, so a lot of times, I have to tell you, and a lot of even U.S. corporations are changing their practices, but they don't talk about it. And I've actually asked a couple of folks, including a couple of high-level CEOs, why do they not advertise what they're doing? So some of them are changing their practices. In the US, they don't talk about it. They're really worried about being attacked for greenwashing. But then, of course, there's also a lot of people, it's both ways. A lot of people are also just doing it and sort of, using it for marketing purposes. It's all over the place. There are organizations working to get corporations and companies to change their practices, and a lot of sort of citizen involvement has led to some changes as well, actually. So it's a mix of different things depending on the country, the product, the company, but there's a lot more activism going on at the sort of citizen level, and I think we're going to see an increase in the next 5 or 10 years that will occur. And I think you'll see a lot more of that. You'll start seeing sustainable palm oil label a lot more and such as well. And actually the internet is the reason our communities are able to do what they're able to do. I don't think 5, 10 years ago, we could be doing what we're doing in terms of our work. I'm in contact with our staff in Peru and Ecuador and our communities by Skype. And GTAT, and that's how we communicate with them. But then the communities have a voice in a way they never did against companies and countries and at the highest level. And we're not an activist organization, but what happens is they're empowered to do what they want to do and couldn't do before without the internet. Yes.
We have a question from Dale Beulah.
Thank you for your great presentation this morning. I know that the deforestation has a lot of ripple effects. I read recently a projection that by 2021, the Amazon could become actually a desert because of the lack of rainfall and water and the climate. Are these governments aware that their countries are actually being destroyed, and are they doing anything, or is it the corruption so devastating that nothing seems to be able to be done?
So I haven't seen the 2021 citation, but yes, the projections, if you look at climate change projections, they show that the Amazon could actually become a desert. And I actually can see this happening, and so I don't focus on that. I focus on trying to do something. Can you imagine what that would do to us in Texas if the Amazon, I mean, if you think about there's North America and there's South America, what that would do to Texas? The Amazon, in the last 5 years, has experienced 2 of the worst droughts in living history, meaning people who live in the jungle have never seen the effects. I have seen, anecdotally, I can tell you what I've seen. I've seen, 3 years ago, I went to 4 different watersheds, it's all tributaries of the Amazon, to our project sites, and there's no fish, no Amazon fish anybody's serving, and I don't eat fish anymore. That's the reason. And I couldn't understand why there wasn't. I still never got an explanation from my scientist friends. But there's a lot going on. What happens if there is that kind of desertification and the western Amazon is going to be okay, but the eastern is supposed to be under those projections? No. And there are a lot of those signs. And so if that happens, yes, people do know. The governments do know. If you think about it, some of the Latin American, the South American countries have some of the most stringent, strongest laws protecting these forests. The problem is with enforcement. And so it's not just corruption, it's a whole bunch of different factors. It's raising awareness, it's all sorts of different things. But we have a role to play. This is why the whole idea, it's like, what's the role that we play? Because if you think about it, even if it's what we consume, how we consume it, puts the pressures, right? And so if we start thinking, okay, we have a role to play in this as well, then I think we can change the mindset. It's not simple. And I think we can actually do it by talking to the government, sort of supporting some of the actions these governments want to make. And they are trying. So next climate conference will be in Lima, COP20. As Rainforest Partnership, we've gone as UN observer delegates. We were the only Texas-based organization that went in Durban. We didn't go to Qatar and didn't go to Warsaw. But we'll be again in Lima because that's where the next one is. So yes, the governments are doing a lot, spending a lot of money, but not always to good results.
We have a question. Would you stand?
My name is Felicia Congable. I have a question. I know to start a business or a nonprofit, you find a need and fulfill it. And can you tell us a little bit about what in your personal history caused you to start this, and what gave you the courage to do it, and what connections you had that helped you to do so?
I teach a class, and I've done many presentations on this. So I don't know what one thing in my life, in my teens, said that I wanted to protect tropical rainforests. That's something I wanted to do. In my 20s, I set it aside, and I said, I let life get in the way, and I said, I will do it when I retire. In my 30s through early 40s, I said, there isn't time to wait. And even as I was doing things that actually was very community-minded and actually made a difference, it didn't feel right. And so I said, it's a longer story, but the shorter version was that I needed to make the change in my life and do this. And what I thought would take 2 years actually only took a few months. So I had my own consulting firm. I started working on this in early 2007, and the next thing, in 4 or 5 months, it all came together. I didn't know what it was going to be. I knew that I wanted to work on protecting tropical rainforests. I didn't know whether it was going to be working for another nonprofit, working at a university, doing something on the consumption side on this end, because I actually did think about that as well. Looked at the universe of protecting tropical rainforests. And then when it came together, I knew it had to be creating a nonprofit. And actually, we started with a business plan. Before we started, the founding board and I, who'd never met each other until the day we got together, we had a whole day planning strategic session facilitated. And by noon, we had a vision and a mission statement. And by 6 o'clock, we had a 6-month strategic plan. And then I went and spent 5 months on the ground in 4 countries and had a matrix of rainforest countries and, for me, what it was the courage. It was just talking to a lot of people and allowing this to sort of percolate and coming to that point where I realized what it needed to be, but looking at all options. And it's something I knew I always wanted to do, and I just knew that there wasn't time to wait given what was happening with deforestation. And then once I went, spent the 5 months on the ground, my gosh, the connections I made from the highest levels of government, all the way down to the community level. And this is what I get to do now, which is amazing, that I get to scale. I can be in the middle of the jungle either sleeping on the floor in somebody's house or sitting on the floor and eating with them, sometimes at table. And then 2 days later, I may be meeting with a minister or a CEO of a multinational. And I can scale all that because what it is, that what you need is being able to bond and connect at a human level. And so just, it was drawing on my life experiences to make it happen, and then just inviting others to be part of what we do. And people have always been there. And the communities are the same thing, identifying communities. Yeah.
We have a question from Ken Coyne.
The question is from Luis Nava, a forester in Peru, telling about being in an all-terrain vehicle and being rocked by the local people, not close to the ocean, but well into the interior of Peru. Can you talk about that area and the people there?
Okay, say what you just said, the area.
It's closer to Brazil side of Peru than to the ocean. This forester said, I was in an all-terrain vehicle. My vehicle and the people were scared to death that they would be killed.
You're talking about, it's, doing, when you stand to protect something, there are often very interests that are at odds with what you want to do, what you think is your birthright or what your mission in life is. And there are forces that have other objectives, and certainly it's not always easy for folks, whether they're folks in the community. So our own Sani Isla community in Ecuador, both of our staff people have felt that way. There are others, thank you. There are others that I know that have been in that position where they have feared for their life. It's whether it's logging interests or mining interests, sometimes those interests, there's millions of dollars at stake. And in our own community in Sani Isla, they said, we will die fighting if we have to. It's very difficult when you know these folks. You have a bond with them. I normally don't talk about this because I don't think we're often ready to hear that kind of threat and emotion, certainly in this country, and it feels very foreign to us, right? But it's very real. But I think the power comes in knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, and having as many people know about it, and that there would be consequences for people who do certain things that they shouldn't be doing, like threatening people's lives. And where we work, those are not things that we've had to worry about. But yeah, it is something for several people I know. Yeah.
I think we have just 3 or 4 more minutes. Is that right, Tom? 2 minutes. Okay. Leslie Currents, our former forum co-chair, has a question.
Thanks. I'll try to make it quick. You mentioned a little bit about the situation in Ecuador. I think the government had said if the international community could pay $10 billion, they would protect the forest, and that didn't really happen, and now they've opened it to logging. What are the chances for that, anything happening there?
It's a longer discussion. I've known this for several years. I've been following the trajectory. I actually talked to the minister who was signing the agreement with UNDP a couple hours before he did that in Copenhagen, which was COP15. He went on to resign, and another environmental minister in Ecuador resigned, and then it sort of got worked out, and then eventually not. So there's so many aspects to it. There have been severe protests in Quito. Ecuadorians don't want the Yasuni is the most biodiverse place on the planet that's been studied, the highest numbers of insects on this planet. And yet, so we don't know. We'll have to see what happens. Yes. I don't know if there was time.
Do you want to make a quick closing statement for us?
Well, I want to thank you all for inviting me. Rainforest Partnership is right here in Austin. We have been here for 6 years because of support of folks like you. The fact that you invited me here the first time, that started a series of presentations I did for the next 2-3 years before many people, not just in Austin, but many other places as well. And I hope you will consider being part of what we do or help us spread the word.
Thank you for an inspiring presentation, Niyanta. Let's give her a big hand.